Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. I'm chomping at the bit to uncover the last few days of what's happened throughout the sports landscape. Thanks for coming by and getting an earful of what is on my mind, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now, Super Bowl 59 is set. There is a lot to discuss here, especially with the nightcap there in Kansas City between the Bills and Chiefs. But I'll start in order because let's just get the first game out of the way. Let's get right down to it. The NFL now has one more game less than 2 weeks away down in New Orleans, which obviously will have plenty of podcasts, plenty of time to unpack and uncover. But for right this very moment, to recap what happened there yesterday on Championship Sunday. And overall, it was a good Sunday. The first game being not so good and the second game being very good. So if you cram that all and try to fit it in one box, you had a good NFL Sunday. And for the first game, one more time, let's get right to it. The Commanders, I thought they had an interesting shot to take a lead and really to put their stamp on this game at 14-12 because that was pretty much the biggest play of the game. And I'm just jumping right into it. Yes, we could talk about Barkley getting the 60-yard touchdown on the first touch of the Eagles with their offensive possession there after the Commanders went 18 plays and 75 yards or somewhere around there where they kicked a field goal and they methodically went down the field, killed a lot of the clock, and then all it took was one home run swing by Barkley to erase that. But even with that being said, when we take a look at 14-12, and I understand you had a turnover there early on, which led to points there for the Eagles there at 7-3. And when Terry McLaurin gets the touchdown to make it 14-12, why did the coach, Dan Quinn, which you understand he's always going to be aggressive, he's always going to try to push the envelope, but he didn't need to go for two there, if you ask me. You don't chase points that early on. And if you don't believe what I'm saying, just go back to the previous week where John Harbaugh at 21-19 went for two when he didn't even need to chase those points at that time. And granted, that was late third quarter, where here it was actually, early second quarter. But even still, 14-12, let's get right to it. 4th and 5 for the Eagles at, I believe, it was the Commander 41-yard line. And if they got to stop there, if they were able to get the ball back at that juncture, turnover on downs for the Eagles, who knows what would have happened there. Not to say that the Commanders would have gone on and win the game, but they certainly would have put their stamp of approval to see whether or not they would have been able to take the lead, and whether it be by field goal or even touchdown for that matter. I get it. We would not know how the game would have unfolded, but if we could turn back the clock and just have a scenario where if the Commanders were able to get a stop, who knows how the rest of that game would have turned out. As it was, A.J. Brown caught that pass there, 35 yards up the left sideline on Marshawn Lattimore, who had just an atrocious game. And next thing you know, they're punching it into the end zone. What else is new? A tush push, which I'm going to get into in a few minutes. But for that to be from 14-12 to now 20-12, and I don't know why, again, the Eagles, Sirianni, they went for two there to try to be cute. All you do is just kick the extra point and you make it 21-12 to where they need two scores as opposed to them not getting the two-point conversion where it was 20-12. But then as it was on the ensuing kickoff, the Commanders fumble the ball, the Eagles get the ball back, and the next thing you know, they're punching it into the end zone again. And 27-12, despite the fact that the Commanders did get a field goal there right before the half to make it 27-15. And even with the Eagles getting the ball coming out of the half, they weren't able to score. In fact, they went 3 and out. And then maybe you thought at that point, all right, let's see if the Commanders could go down the field. Even if they kicked the field goal there to make it 27-18, but you wanted for them to get a touchdown to even make it that much more interesting. They also went 3 and out. And then the Eagles went ahead and scored. And then even when the Commanders got the touchdown to make it 34-23, you thought, all right, let's see what's going to happen here. And then they had an opportunity at 34-23 after the Eagles, I believe, went 3 and out. And then the Commanders were starting to march down the field, and they already got burned by 2 turnovers, whether it was the fumble there in the first half or in the first quarter, and then obviously the kickoff where they fumbled there. So what happens? Austin Eckler catches the pass. Now they're already in Eagle territory, and then he fumbles the ball, and then they take over, march on down the field, and now this is where it gets just absolutely comical with this tush push. So 34-23, they march on down the field. Now they're at the 2-yard line. The Commanders trying to time the snap. They get offsides, half the distance to the goal. They do it again where Frankie Louvu was acting like Superman, flying over the offensive line, hitting Jalen Hurts. Then you see it happen again to the point where the official, Clete Blakeman, had to come out and say, if the next time this happens, they're going to award them a touchdown, which I believe, what was it? It was already 3 times where they encroached and were able to get the ball even that much closer to the goal line. But here it is with this tush push. They got to ban this play. And I talked about this, go back 2 years ago on the podcast when the Eagles were making their Super Bowl run. And people would say, well, JAYREELZ, it's a legal play. What's wrong with it? So on and so forth. And I understand that that was a play or the goal line situation where it's 1 in a million. But it becomes an absolute joke where you have Jalen Hurts and 2 tight ends trying to push him through to either get a first down or a touchdown. And to me, it's an automatic slam dunk. Now, mind you, it didn't work for them in the first half on a play where I believe it was for, I don't know if that was for a 2-point conversion. A lot of these plays are just getting mixed up, and I'm going freestyle, people, off the top of my head. So it's not as if I have a whole log of what it is that I've written down to kind of chronicle, but they did get stopped there. But that is a play where 99.9% of the time, and you've seen it throughout the last couple of years, they have been ultra successful in converting either a 3rd and 1 or 3rd and inches or 4th and 1, 4th and inches. It is pretty much an unstoppable play. And I can't fault the Commanders because they're trying to time the snap. They're trying to see if they could get some sort of edge to slow down or even stop, in this case, this tush push. But until somebody gets hurt, until somebody really is on the bottom of a pile where they're rolling around, grabbing a knee or an ankle or even a leg for that matter, that's when they're going to have to outlaw it. And until then, this play is going to continue. And we're going to see this here in the Super Bowl where you're going to have an opportunity, whether it's 2nd and short, 3rd and short, 4th and goal, whatever it may be, that this play is going to take place. And I'm just tired of it. I said this 2 years ago, more than 2 years ago. Check those receipts. And for those who have watched and followed the podcast going way back, I'm tired of this. And it's funny because as successful as it has been for the Eagles, it doomed the Bills in the second game. And you know I'm going to get to that when we talk about Bills and Chiefs. But as far as that play, they ended up getting a touchdown. 41-23, the game is over. I don't want to hear what Kevin Burkhardt has to say. Oh, well, the game is still not out of reach. Oh, it's a 3-possession game. 3-possession game with 9 minutes to go. And I understand they have to say that to kind of keep the viewer watching, but they're not fooling the die-in-the-wool sports fan or football fan, etc. That game was over once they got that turnover from Eckler and they punched it into the end zone. And even at 34-23, that yes, they had an opportunity to cut it to 1 score, but until they were able to do that, then stop the Eagles again and then get possession back, then I would have been concerned on, oh, maybe the Eagles could blow this. But there was no way, shape, or form that the Eagles were going to lose that game. And as it was, they tacked on another 2 touchdowns after that at 41-23. And that was the game. Another just terrible game, awful. I get it that they were hanging around the Commanders. But was there any real threat in this game? Not at all. And unfortunately for Jayden Daniels, who didn't play bad in the game, I understand he got that pick there late by Quinyon Marshall in the end zone there. And it made you think whether or not that the Eagles are going to put up a 50-50 piece on the Commanders. But as it was, they ended up getting a long drive, 4 plays, 80 yards, and Jalen Hurts actually played well in the game. But for the Commanders, and you know what? I'll hold off on the Commanders now. Let me make it more about the Eagles, and then I'll talk about Washington. But I said Quinyon Mitchell. Sure, I got his name wrong, right? Here I am trying to get everything out in one fell swoop, and here I am butchering names and thinking, yes, Quinyon Mitchell. So I said Marshall before, and I reversed and got back on track here. So now as I move forward here with the Eagles, I mean, what more can you say? The team had 6 rushing touchdowns, actually 7 when you think about it, when they tacked on the final one with Shipley. 3 by Barkley, 3 by Jalen Hurts, and the Eagles are now back in the dance. Second time in 3 years. Just a wonderful performance. Defensively, they did what they could to try to slow down the Commander offense, as we've seen here throughout this postseason, and they had them turn the ball over left and right, especially in big spots. And the Eagles are now back at another Super Bowl. So for Sirianni, the coach, and for Jalen Hurts, let's see if they can go back there and try to seal the deal from what a game that they actually played very well in and could have won the game. They had the one bad call, as we know, there on that hold, which I get it that maybe in the regular season you call that, but in the Super Bowl it wasn't egregious. The hold there, I believe it was on James Bradbury, if I'm not mistaken. And therefore, now you have the Eagles trying to go back to see whether or not they can win a Super Bowl. We all know that they beat the Patriots there. What was it, Super Bowl 52? Lost there 2 years ago in 57, and now they're back in 59 with another shot. As for the Commanders, listen, you cannot complain. I'm sure if you're Kevin Durant, if you're anybody that's a huge Commander fan, I know that this is a tough one. You wanted to get an opportunity to have your rookie quarterback and to have this season continue, and there are no guarantees. I'm sure a lot of people thinking, oh, we got the quarterback, we have our coach. The coach is a little spotty, if you ask me, although he had a very good year, and now's not the time to pound on Dan Quinn. But for the Commanders, this is one that you'd only hope, which will burn in the chest of the quarterback, same for the coach for that matter, and try to get themselves back to the same position next year and maybe with a chance to even host a game or two in their building. Now, the only way they'll do that, of course, is they have to win a division, because with their 12-5 record, they had to go on the road throughout the playoffs to get to this point. So for Daniels, we know his future is super bright. The organization on a whole, they opened up the windows. They got all the bad air out from Daniel Snyder, and now the good air in with the Josh Harris, Magic Johnson, Dan Quinn, and their whole front office. So the future certainly is looking up there in Washington, but you can only hope. There are no guarantees. You would think that they may get back at some point, but you don't take it for granted. This was an opportunity that, listen, they were behind the 8 ball, knowing that they were going into a hostile environment, that even with the Eagle offense, especially their passing game, has not been good. But yesterday, everything clicked, and getting those turnovers were huge, because you can never factor in turnovers or predict them in games like this. And when you have 28 points coming off of those turnovers, do the math, people. Now, despite the fact that they still would have won the game, even without the turnovers, because it would have been 27-23, obviously it would have been a lot closer. But again, you can't look at the game that way. But the Eagles, kudos to them and what they did. 3 straight games in the postseason, all at home, thanks to Washington beating Detroit, because they wanted to go to Detroit if the Lions were able to beat the Commanders there about 9 days ago. But now here you go with the Eagles off to another Super Bowl. Now, as far as the nightcap, I thought it was an excellent game. And I'll even say it was a great game. I don't think it was a classic by any stretch. You had the 1 turnover. The time of possession was off by a matter of seconds. When you look at the yardage, when you look at the passing yards, you look at the rushing yards, all across the board, it was pretty much dead even. But here's the thing. How do you not bet against, or how do you bet against Patrick Mahomes in these spots? And Andy Reid, for that matter. And they were able to overcome the early turnover there when they were up 7-3, the fumble by Patrick Mahomes, where the Bills actually, that led to a touchdown to make it 10-7. And even though Buffalo was hanging in there, and Josh Allen did play a good game, and I'm going to get to him in a little bit when I talk about the Bills overview, but the Chiefs, they always seem to find a way. It doesn't matter. Whether it's guys like Xavier Worthy who had a big game, whether it's Kareem Hunt who added a lot to the running game, Isaiah Pacheco, slow start, but he actually got some big yards there late in the game. And then when you take a look at even other guys, Juju Smith-Schuster, who made a contribution with 2 big catches. And this team, unlike the team that won their first Super Bowl with Tyreek Hill and a much younger and healthier Travis Kelce, and even Travis Kelce only had a couple of catches in the game, but he had 1 big catch there in the 4th quarter. And to me, this was all on Patrick Mahomes, rushing for 2 touchdowns, making key plays when he absolutely had to. And here's how I'm going to look at this game overall as far as the big play. 22-21, 13:01 left to go in the game. Mind you, on this drive that the Bills had, they converted on a 4th and 1 with Josh Allen. But for whatever the reason, his 6'5", 245-pound body at 4th and 1, and I believe it was at the Chiefs, maybe he was at the Chiefs' 41-yard line, how he couldn't get his body, and it looked like it was close. But it was inconclusive on whether or not the ball broke the plane on that 4th and 1, the second go-around on that drive, because to me, granted that there was still a whole fourth quarter to go, but at 22-21, if the Bills were able to move the ball there and just move the chains and maybe eat up a little bit of clock, and dare I even say get into the end zone for a touchdown, right, we still do not know how the game's going to play out, but could you imagine that if they got the touchdown with an extra point, they would have been up 29-21. Granted, it's a one-score game, and as we saw there, the Chiefs went down, got the touchdown and a two-point conversion, even at 22-21, right after that turnover on downs. But still, sometimes, even in a spot like that, as good, as cool, and as collected that the Chiefs have been throughout this run, chances are, even if it was 29-21, they probably would have went down the field and scored, because this team rarely beats themselves, and they rarely beat themselves in big spots. Think about that comment there when I talk about the Bills later on. So now here it is, 22-21, they get stopped there. Who knows how the game would have played out, but then the Chiefs go down there, score, and they make it 29-21 or 29-22 after the two-point conversion. And then the Bills come back, big fourth downs that they converted as well. Even that 4th and goal there where they got the pass to Curtis Samuel, which they had to go for it there. You can't kick a field goal at 29-22. What is it going to be, 29-25? You get the Chiefs the ball right back? You don't want to do that. If you do get stopped there, at least the Chiefs are deep in their own territory, so who knows, maybe you get a 3 and out and away you go. But as it was, they got the touchdown there, and then of course the ensuing drive, they ended up kicking the field goal, and now it's all on Buffalo to see whether or not that if they can march down and tie the game or even take the lead. And I thought, for me, in that final drive, I thought that the Buffalo Bills had to have the mentality of going for a touchdown. I don't care if they left 1 second on the clock. We saw what happened there in Arrowhead, as I talked about here over the last couple of weeks. You cannot leave any time left on the clock for pretty much any quarterback that's very good and holds their weight in water. But as we all know, Patrick Mahomes, you can't do that. So when you have a scenario at 32-29 where they're marching down the field and they didn't even get to midfield, but here they were on a 4th and 5 where they faced an all-out blitz, and this was right at the 2-minute warning. And I'm sure that whatever play that the Bills were going to draw up there, they were going to just try to get to the sticks, whether that meant it was going to be for Josh Allen to run it, or whether that means they were going to try to get it to one of their tight ends, or even Amari Cooper, who had a sighting here. He actually made a contribution in this game. Or maybe to get a wheel route to James Cook, which was a successful play on the previous drive. But for them to get stopped on a blitz where it looked like they were going to blitz up the middle, and then they came off the edge where Allen had to backtrack and throw up a Hail Mary where Dalton Kincaid, I know Tony Romo said, oh, he should have caught the ball. That was a could have, because he had to be outstretched and certainly had to contort his body a little bit. Yes, he could have caught the ball, but that wasn't a 100% absolute should have had it, and he should have continued to drive at that point. That was just a situation where they were unable to read the blitz there, and Allen, he had to hoist up the ball to see whether or not he was going to convert there, and as it was, you knew that it was going to be slim but none in order for any receiver or the tight end to corral that ball. And as it was, it made me think back to a play early in the game where Xavier Worthy looked like the ball was intercepted, but it was caught there, and even though the ball hit the ground and they had a possession, I thought maybe it was a situation where maybe they would call it incomplete. But be that as it may, with that 4th and 5, and even with their timeouts in their back pocket, what was it, 1:54 to go in the game, they couldn't get a stop. And the Buffalo defense, even though they did get that 1 first down and they still had 2 timeouts, and they were hoping to see whether or not that they would be able to get a stop there, that maybe get the ball back with about 35 seconds to go in the game. But of course, 3rd and 8, Samaje Perine, gets the reception there. I believe it was on 3rd and 8, little screen pass out in the flat, and then he goes up the sideline, and that's your game. And the Chiefs, here we go again. Another 2 weeks of this nonsense, another 2 weeks of them trying to get another Super Bowl, and I get it, the historical and even immortal status that this team will get if they win this Super Bowl. And we have, like I said, plenty of time to dissect, plenty of time to regurgitate everything that's red and gold and even green and white for that matter. But Kansas City, again, this is a team that doesn't beat themselves. This is a team that, for everything we've talked about, and if you've listened to the podcast going back to mid-season, the near misses, the Houdini acts, the escape acts that they've had, blocking, field goal attempts to actually have them lose games, or the game on Black Friday against the Raiders, how they were fortunate enough there. I mean, all these different games where they literally pulled out of their rear end. The Carolina Panthers coming back from behind to tie the game and then winning it. It's just unbelievable how this team has performed throughout the course of this year, to where now they're just 60 minutes away from doing something that no other team in the history of sport has done. And that's win 3 straight Super Bowls. And I'm not going to get into it right now. Can they do it? How they'll do it? No. Again, plenty of time to discuss this and really get in the weeds on this thing. But now, that's Kansas City. We know their DNA. We know their toughness, their mettle, etc. Now to flip it to Buffalo. Now, Josh Allen played a very good game. But I hate to bring this up, and I know people are this is going to be very unpopular. And people are going to say, JAYREELZ, you're off your rocker. And people are going to say, JAYREELZ, you better pipe down with that, especially for the people in Western New York. And I'll also throw in the fact that it is the Chiefs, it is Patrick Mahomes, and trying to overcome their experience and their know-how and their stick-to-itiveness is certainly daunting, to say the least. But Joe Burrow went into Arrowhead and won a game, and almost won a second one in back-to-back years. Josh Allen, this isn't to say he's not ready for the big spotlight. This isn't to say that Josh Allen is not a big-time player. He's probably going to be the MVP this year. But Josh Allen, he's going to have to answer those questions for another year. He cannot win the big game. And yes, he did win a big game last week against Baltimore, but Baltimore has their own issues. And their quarterback has similar issues to Josh Allen. But I don't want to hear it. Josh Allen, to me, he had a chance to slay the beast. 32-29. 2+ minutes to go in the game. He could have marched his team down the field, punched it into the end zone because they needed to get a touchdown there. A field goal, all right, it would have tied the game. But because you would have thought right then and there that the Chiefs would have won the game. But he had an opportunity. Everybody wants to call him Superman with the cape, 6'5", 240, indestructible. Go back to that play at 13:01 left in the fourth quarter at 4th and 1, where he converted a 4th and 1. He didn't do it. He didn't deliver. And I'm sorry. And I have nothing against the Bills. I have nothing against Josh Allen. I like Allen as a player. He is a gunslinger. He is as tough as it comes. But he still was unable to seal the deal. He's a guy who's going to have to answer that. So he falls into that same category as Lamar Jackson. Granted, he's had a lot more success. He's won 7 playoff games. And you saw the stat. He has the most wins of anybody that has not made it to a Super Bowl. And he's going to have to deal with that for another rest of this winter, into the spring, training camp, start of the season, etc. This was their time. I'm sorry. I don't want to hear it. They could beat them in the regular season again next year, no matter whether it's in Buffalo, Kansas City, or on the moon. It matters in January. And one more time, this isn't a knock Josh Allen to say whether or not he's not a big-time player or he's not a guy that is afraid of the moment. He is not. But he has not been able to win a big game. And I don't want to hear a game against the Lions in the regular season in late November into December. I don't want to hear in the divisional round where he had to win that game last week. No doubt about it. He had to. Because the last couple of years, he hasn't been able to, the last 3 years, he hadn't been able to get out of the divisional round. But he was able to do that, and that's fine. But what really would have made him stamp the approval was to win that game last night, because he would have slayed the dragon. He wouldn't have to answer that question anymore. And even if he would have lost in the Super Bowl, which would have been bitter in its own right, but there would have been no more questions about whether or not he could beat Patrick Mahomes in a huge spot. Not a big spot, huge spot, and he didn't do it. That's it. And I know people are going to be upset, people are going to be this, people are going to be that, and I'm sure there's already pundits out there that are probably killing Josh Allen as I speak, but I'm not killing Josh Allen. I'm just saying that this is a guy, can you really trust with your team's fortunes and chances on the line on whether or not he can deliver? And you know what the answer is to that right this very moment? It is not. Case closed. That's all there is to it. So before I get to coaching news and notes, because there's a lot to talk about there, Super Bowl 59. How do I feel about the game? I know I talked about this the other day where if you're Roger Goodell, now it doesn't matter. This is going to get $115 million. It's probably going to top last year's Super Bowl numbers as the most watched television event in the history of TV. So yes, we get it. And now with Kansas City back on board and Taylor Swift, we get it. And I'm just tired of the shenanigans there with Travis Kelce, etc. But I thought it would have been fascinating. You got Washington, Buffalo, even Washington, KC to a lesser degree, but it would have been Washington, Buffalo, Buffalo, Philly, Washington, KC, and the last game I wanted to see was KC at Philly. I hate this game. I really do. The only thing about this game, unlike 2 years ago, is that Saquon Barkley's in the game and Jason Kelce's not. And of course, Fletcher Cox too, I get it. But that's it. And people are going to say, oh, we got Saquon. I already got Eagle fans in my ear. Oh, we're going to see 2 weeks from now, so on and so forth. All right. But I've seen this movie before, and I get it that this movie has not been scripted or played out just yet, but just think about this. When the Chiefs won their first Super Bowl, and they beat the 49ers, and then they played them in a rematch there last year, how did that turn out? Where Brock Purdy couldn't convert on a 3rd and 4, which if he did, they would have won the game. Didn't happen. Again, not seizing the game in a big spot. And then with the Eagles, what happened there? I know the hold there, which was atrocious. But the Eagles did have the ball with a chance to tie the game after Buckner kicked the field goal to make it, 38-35? And he threw one Hail Mary, which fell 20 yards short. And we know Jalen Hurts, he can't break a pane of glass. If you ask me, sorry. He's just not that type of quarterback. But I can almost see the same thing playing out because you know Steve Spagnuolo is going to dial up a particular defense to slow down Saquon Barkley because they're not going to be able to stop him. And Jalen Hurts, I get it. He had a better game yesterday in the air. And kudos to the coaching staff to now having maybe a little bit of confidence in the passing game for Jalen Hurts moving forward. But can you see the Chiefs coming up in a big spot defensively, similar to what they did yesterday against Buffalo and similar to what they're probably going to do 2 weeks from now? I could see it. And the Chiefs, again, we have a lot to talk about in the podcast days and next week and a half to come, but I did not want to see the Super Bowl. And to me, it's going to end up being the same result. And I'm just going to leave it at this before I move on. Here's why I don't think the Eagles have a shot, of course. I'm not going to say that they have no shot. And can they win the game? Of course they can. But it's going to boil down to this one particular instance. Coach, quarterback. Reed, Mahomes versus Sirianni and Hurts. Who are you going to take? And how can you bet against Mahomes? Case closed. That's it. Now, as I move on to the coaches and everything that's happened over the last 3 or 4 days, the situation in Jacksonville got a little hairy and dicey where the Tampa Bay Buccaneer offensive coordinator Liam Cohen looked like he was about to take the job there in Jacksonville, but then decided to withdraw his name from that particular instance. And then the owner, Shad Khan of the Jaguars, decided to fire Trent Baalke, the GM, so he sent him packing. So now Liam Cohen, who actually was going to sign a deal to stay in Tampa to be the offensive coordinator, and the rumor had it that was going to be up to $11 million for an offensive coordinator. That I find a little bit much of a stretch, is based on news that I heard. But now with Baalke out, and I guess Shad Khan said, hey, I got the GM out, you want to come back? And then what does he do? He says, bye-bye to Tampa, stiff arms that deal, and takes the head coaching job in Jacksonville. So what a turn of events there. Now, Liam Cohen, I get it. Hot guy. He turned the Tampa Bay Buccaneer offense to a somewhat juggernaut, considering what they did. Baker Mayfield throwing for well over, 4,500 yards, I believe, this year. And they put up a lot of points throughout the course of the season. And Bucky Irving was a guy that came out of nowhere to be a staple into their running game. And Mike Evans, another 1,000-yard season without Chris Godwin. And they've gotten some pieces there, but they obviously didn't get out of the first round. And here they are giving Liam Cohen as if this guy is Ben Johnson and been around the block a few times. So to me, it's a combination of bad job by Cohen by spurning the offer by the Buccaneers, and then Shad Khan, who doesn't know his ass from his elbow as far as being an owner in this league, that says, all right, I'll bring you on board. Well, let's see if that's going to work, considering they need a complete overhaul with that offense with Trevor Lawrence and company to see whether or not that they could get themselves back on top of an AFC South, which is obviously led by the Texans and maybe the Colts if they get their act together. So that's number one. The Cowboys hire Brian Schottenheimer, I know to the chagrin of Cowboy fans from coast to coast. I mean, what can I say? Now, who else were they going to bring in? Was Dion really a possibility? As I talked about there a couple weeks ago, I wouldn't have hired him if that was my team. So, no Kellen Moore. They interviewed him. They interviewed a bunch of coaches, but they decided on Schottenheimer. I don't know what it was. I'd have to watch the press conference. I don't even think there was been a press conference yet in Dallas in regards to Schottenheimer. But now Cowboy fans have to live with that. That would have been my guy. And we know he's the son of the dearly departed and longtime NFL coach Marty Schottenheimer. But all I do is just shrug my shoulders and say, okay, who knows? You got to give him a chance. Maybe he'll light a fire under this offense, bring some... I don't know how innovative he's going to be, because going back to his days with the Jets, if you remember with Rex Ryan, it was ground and pound. Are they going to go back to that philosophy? Are they going to open it up? Who knows? So the Cowboys have their coach there and a former offensive coordinator. And then you had Robert Saleh go back to San Francisco as the defensive coordinator to see if he could build up his resume there and maybe get another head coaching job along the way. Speaking of the Jets, they hire a GM. I talked about this on Thursday's podcast. Woody Johnson hires a coach before he brings in the GM. So they go to Denver to pluck a guy in a one. What's his name? Let me just double check it before I didn't want to butcher his name. Darren Moogie, I guess you pronounce his name, or Mogi. I'll say Mogi. So 39 years old, a young guy off of the Bronco front office. And Woody Johnson had conferred with Aaron Glenn and asked for some input and gave him his blessing. So now you have this marriage between a green GM and a first-time head coach. I like the coaching hire. If you didn't listen to the podcast there, Aaron Glenn, he is a Jet. Who knows? Maybe he'll build that culture there to finally getting the Jets back to some sort of respectability before they can even get to some relevancy. But Moogie, let's see what he's going to do here. He has the 7th pick. They're going to need some help there, and a lot of help for that matter, in order for them to get themselves back. And the first question that they have to ask is whether or not they bring back Aaron Rodgers. Now, unless they have a quarterback that they're going to try to trade for or even try to move up in the draft, I would think you'd have to keep Rodgers just to keep yourself safe for this first year. But it's up to Rodgers whether or not he wants to come back. Is he going to believe in the Glenn Moogie marriage and the front office and that coaching staff? That remains to be seen. We'll have to wait and see on that. So I'm sure that's going to be an ongoing story here, especially where I live this offseason, on whether or not Aaron Rodgers comes back with the new helm in the front office and the head coach. And then the Texans fired their offensive coordinator, where last year it was all coconuts and palm trees, but Bobby Slowick out there after 2 years. Obviously, did not have a good year this year. Although 10-7 won a division and did win a playoff game, but that offensive line was Swiss cheese. Can't put it all on C.J. Stroud. And obviously, we're losing Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, two big offensive pieces there. I mean, how could you fire the offensive coordinator? I guess they had to get a scapegoat there in order for them to move on. Well, there you go. And that is your NFL. So now that we can put to rest the championship weekend and look forward to a Super Bowl that I'm certainly not looking forward to. Of course, I'm going to watch and follow, etc. You know that. And I'm certainly not going to cheat you guys from that. But this is a game I do not love. All right, now let me turn my attention. I'm going to pivot to tennis here. I'll get to the NBA, NHL, which is not much going on there. I got a couple of storylines I could discuss. And Major League Baseball, the latest with Pete Alonso, and an interesting signing by the Braves. No shock there, as the Braves always are very shrewd and find their ways to get around some good personnel to bolster their roster. But for the tennis, Australian Open concluded there yesterday. I guess I could kind of put Jannik Sinner do this real quick. Jannik Sinner straight sets over Alexander Zverev. Zverev, who in his match against Novak Djokovic in the semifinal, where Djokovic had to retire because of that leg injury he suffered against Alcaraz, and he was unable to go after that first set, which was a tie-breaking set, which I believe Zverev won 7-6. But first off, the Australian fans, where did they come off booing Djokovic off the court, where Djokovic gave him a 2 thumbs up? I'm sure that was sarcastic. I'm sure he'd like to give a couple of other fingers instead, but obviously kept it classy. But for the Australian tennis fan to just boo Djokovic off the court, I mean, seriously? This is what we're going to all of a sudden now resort to? And I get it that there's a history there with Djokovic and the tournament itself dating back a couple of years where he was unable to perform because he wasn't vaccinated due to COVID. And I'm sure there were other instances over the years, despite the fact that he's won 10 Australian Opens. Maybe they were sick and tired of him winning, and maybe they wanted to see Zverev put a number on Djokovic here. But he retired, and with the boos, just inexcusable and uncalled for. I don't want to hear it. It's almost as if they're trying to puff their chest out as being like this dyed-in-the-wool or even passionate tennis fan. Don't do that to an all-time great. I mean, and I'm not the biggest Djokovic fan. I respect him to the high heavens, no doubt. How could you not? But, man, that was just a terrible job by them. But with Djokovic retiring after that first set, you figure that Zverev would have come into this match well-rested, despite the fact that Sinner swept Ben Shelton in his own right in the semifinal. So now, here it is, the final where you knew Sinner was going to be a heavy favorite. And what did he do? Straight sets. 6-3, 2-6. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, straight sets. I'm looking at Keys and Sabalenka, which I'll talk about next. And even though I believe there's a tiebreak set in between, but there was no ifs, ands, buts, and maybes about Sinner not coming out of this victorious, winning back-to-back Australian Opens here in the process. And right now, there's no argument on him being the #1 player of the year. Now, it's going to be interesting to see moving forward as they move on to the French there in the latter part of May, where he's going to be a guy that's going to be tested on whether or not he's going to be able to get a French, even a Wimbledon for that matter, because he hasn't been able to get that far in those 2 tournaments. He may have gotten to a semis in the French, but he has not gotten past that to get himself set up for a run to where he could win multiple Grand Slams in a calendar year. So for him, he's won the Australian in consecutive years. Kudos. And he deserves to be the top dog there in the sport. But I need to see more, similar to Iga Świątek when she is a French Open queen and has won 3 in a row and 4 of the last 5. And who knows if she's going to be a favorite going into that particular tournament, despite the fact that she's not a #1 overall. But I need to see more from Sinner on whether or not, oh, okay, this guy now has his game in tune, not only on a hard court, but on a clay surface, on a grass surface, and where he could really be a favorite going into these tournaments by, I don't want to say year in and year out, month in, month out, as we move along here on this tennis calendar. But Sinner, right now, no argument, the guy is at the top of his game and deservedly the #1 tennis player in the world. And on the women's side, Aryna Sabalenka, who had won back-to-back in her own right, looking for a three-peat, and she was thwarted by Madison Keys, a huge, monumental upset. And this is after Sabalenka got off to a slow start, and that's the one thing about Sabalenka. She could kind of let her psyche get into the way of her playing, and it certainly saw that there in the first game where Keys just came out storming. She came out to a 2-love lead there in the first game, and you kind of thought to yourself, is Sabalenka going to get on track here? But Madison Keys kept the pressure on, and even though Sabalenka, after losing the first set, came roaring back to where she won 6-2, and you thought, all right, now that she's stemmed the tide here, let's see whether or not Sabalenka is going to outlast Keys, who has never won a final and been to one other final in a Grand Slam, and I believe it was the U.S. Open 8 years ago. Now, Madison Keys is 29. It's not as if she's in her early and mid-20s, and as we all know, tennis, a lot of these players come through in the ranks in their teens. So for Keys, she even said in the post-match that she had to step up. She just stayed the course. She trusted in her whole demeanor, knowing that she, all right, let Sabalenka come back. But now it's a scenario where she rose to the occasion. And to get another 3-set win her 5th 3-set win where she won 7-5 in an epic final set. For her to beat Sabalenka there in that Australian Open final was nothing short of marvelous. And for her to win her first ever title, to do it against someone who was going for a three-peat, again, winning 5 3-win sets here. First time I believe that's ever happened in the Australian Open, or even in an Open era for that matter. And not only that, but along the way, she beat not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 top 10 seeds to a championship, which hadn't been done since 1980. When Yvonne Goolagong, who gave her the trophy here at the Australian Open, did it at Wimbledon back in 1980. And if you're wondering who those 4 tennis players are, Danielle Collins, Iga Świątek, of course Sabalenka here in the final, and Elena Rybakina. So when you're going to beat 4 of the top 10 women's players in the world, there's no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about it. You deserve to win this tournament. And now, let's see if Keys, who now could claim herself as not to be a top-flight tennis player, and I believe she's ranked 11th in the world, to not win a major, now she's finally done so. And let's see whether or not this will build momentum. Granted, you still got to wait another almost 3 months before you get to Roland Garros in Paris to play in the French Open. But just a stupendous job by Keys, winning a big-time major, an Australian Open, and which really sealed the deal on the tournament, because the men's side, Sinner pretty much did it without breaking a sweat, and Keys did it with 10 times the sweat, winning a championship. So congratulations to both Sinner and Keys down under, as the first Grand Slam of the tennis year is now in the books. All right, now let me lace up the high tops as I put the tennis racket away for a few months, go through the NBA, and there really isn't much to unpack here. I mean, there absolutely isn't. I know that the Cavaliers have now lost 3 in a row, and maybe this is the time for the Celtics to shift into gear here, because the Celtics, who had a rough road trip from the standpoint of, yeah, they did win 4 of the 5 games when you think about it, but it was rough from this standpoint. They had won in Golden State there on Monday afternoon, MLK Day. Then they beat the Clippers before losing to the Lakers. And I got my math wrong. They won they played 3 games in 4 nights. They went 2-1 there, and then they won in Dallas there on Saturday. A rematch of the NBA Finals, as the Celtics pretty much beat up the Mavs in Dallas. But for the Cavaliers, now losing 3 in a row, they actually lost 2 games to the Rockets here over the last few days, sandwiched in by a loss to the Sixers in Philadelphia. So now that the Celtics have won 3 of the last 4, and they were able to withstand an embarrassing loss there in LA against the Lakers after beating the Clippers there in overtime at the Intuit Dome. So the next night, they had no legs left. The Lakers just ran them out of the gym, which obviously, as a Celtic fan, you do not want to see. But what I found was pretty interesting, that after the win against the Cavaliers, you had Kristaps Porzingis come out to say that this team hasn't really clicked here. They've been cruising here throughout the course of the year. Now, remind you, they started off 21-5, and since then they were kind of a little bit over 500. They haven't really separated themselves and have been middling there with the Knicks and even with the Bucks trying to thrust themselves into the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. But he even admitted that they had to regroup, especially after that loss to the Lakers. And granted that they were playing 3 games in 4 nights and an overtime game the night before against the Clippers. But for whatever the reason, they said that they're going to try to get that killer instinct back. And even Jaylen Brown says that we just have to continue to work. We have to continue to play defense, because they know when they play defense, that's when everything else will kind of open up there offensively in transition. And of course, with a lot of the 3-pointers that they shoot. And when they're making 3-pointers, they're going to be tough to stop, as you know. But hopefully this is a situation where now that they have seen the Cavaliers come back to the pack a little bit, and how they're now just 5 in the loss, I believe. Let me pull up the standings right here. They're 5 in the loss in the East and 4.5 back. Now, the Cavaliers are still in good stead, despite the fact that they were past the halfway point of the season. And now there's going to be interesting to see how the Cavaliers play. Not to say that they're going to put their pedal off the metal, or it's going to be a scenario where now they're going to start a free fall, although 3 in a row here for a team that has led from in front throughout. Remember, they started 15-0 and put up big numbers there early on this year. But it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to play here and how they're going to stem this tide, because whether or not the Celtics start to inch closer, even the Knicks for that matter, the Knicks are right now 2 games behind the Celtics in the standings, but we'll see if there's going to be a little bit of a shift here in the Eastern Conference on whether or not the Cavaliers will keep the Celtics at bay, or now the Celtics will start to develop that killer instinct and not have that flick-the-switch mentality that, we won a championship, we're good, we know we're good, and when it's crunch time, or let's say they're down by 12 late in the third quarter against a good opponent, that they could just all of a sudden turn it on. They got to wipe that out with the quickness, even if it is the latter part of January. So, interesting storyline there to see whether or not the Celtics are going to get that killer instinct back to try to see if they could get close to the top of the East and be a threat there to the Cavaliers, because I will say this. If it does become Cavs-Celtics in an Eastern Conference final, I understand home court doesn't mean everything in this day and age, because we've seen so many teams lose their Game 7 in their building. But who would you trust more, despite the fact that the Celtics haven't been great in their building over the last 2 years? But would you trust Cleveland going into Boston winning a Game 7, or would you trust Boston winning a Game 7 in Cleveland? I know for me, I'd rather have the Celtics have the home court, but this would bode well for Cleveland to hang in there to win, because I would think their chances of winning a Game 7 are going to be tougher than it would be for Boston going to Cleveland for a Game 7. So that's what you have. Other than that, everything is pretty much the same. I know the Grizzlies have played well. Even with them winning 6 in a row, they're still tied, although they are a game in the loss column behind the Rockets in the Western Conference. And that 2-3 is huge, even though we still have plenty of basketball to play, because if you have that 2 seed, you'll be able to host in the second round before maybe having to go to play Oklahoma City in a Western Conference final. So that's a race we'll have to keep in mind here between the Grizzlies and Rockets as we move it along. But other than that, there isn't really much to discuss. Now, I will say this. I talked about this weeks ago. The Spurs right now, although they're 1 in the loss, and that's perfectly fine, but if you're Adam Silver, and I don't want to hear it, I'd rather see San Antonio in the postseason to get in that 7-10 range than Golden State. And right now, they are tied in the loss with the Warriors, although the Warriors are 22-23, a game under, and San Antonio is 20-23, so they have 2 games at hand on the Warriors. And the Warriors are outside looking in on the Kings, who have a 1-game lead over the Warriors for that 10th and final spot for the play-in tournament. But I would think Adam Silver, as much as he would want to see Steph Curry, I get it, but I think they'd rather see Victor Wembanyama. They want to see what Wembanyama could do on a big stage. We've seen what the Golden State Warriors have done. They're an older team. And as we saw last year in the play-in game, they got ousted. So if they get to another play-in scenario, are they going to be an automatic to be an 8th seed to get into the big bulk of the playoffs? There's no guarantee. And we saw them lose a couple of years ago in the play-in round 2 where they lost 2 games in a row. So they are not an automatic that if the Warriors get in, that they're going to have this long run ahead of them. I'd rather see San Antonio, and not to say that San Antonio is going to get an 8 seed and get themselves on track to a point where maybe they could upset the apple cart there against a team like Oklahoma City. But I'd rather see Victor Wembanyama and see what he could do on a playoff stage than to see the Warriors and keep those receipts for later on. That's not to say that the Spurs are automatically going to win or they're going to put themselves in position to get that last spot. I won't go as far as saying that, but if you ask me, who would I rather see in that 10th spot? I'd rather see San Antonio than Golden State. And as far as the schedule here in the early part of the week, now the Lakers are going to be on an East Coast trip here where they're going to play Charlotte tonight and then Philadelphia tomorrow. And the Saturday showcase for the NBA starts this coming Saturday, where you'll have Lakers at the Garden to play the Knicks. So that's one that I'm sure a lot of people will look forward to watching. But you'll have tonight, a bunch of games. Houston at Boston, good game. But now they're coming off a back-to-back because remember, they were in Cleveland the night before. So let's see whether or not that they're going to have any legs to play the Celtics tonight up in Beantown. Orlando, Miami. You have Memphis at New York tonight. So you have John Morant front and center here at the Garden. Look at that. Sacramento, who lost to the Knicks there the other night. Now in Brooklyn tonight. I know Brooklyn, no big deal. But Sacramento, like I said, that 10 seed right now in the Western Conference. Denver, Chicago. Atlanta, Minnesota. Clippers in Phoenix. Tomorrow. Wait, is this right? Oh, Houston played at Cleveland on Saturday. That's right. So no back-to-back. That was my error there because Cleveland did play Philadelphia Friday and then Cleveland played Houston Saturday. So, yeah, that's my error with the back-to-back. So Houston will be refreshed and ready to go because Houston will play in Atlanta tomorrow. And then Wednesday, what do you have? Anything juicy? Cleveland, Miami. Denver, New York. So you have the Nuggets coming into town on Wednesday. And yeah, that will do it as far as your NBA. Minnesota, Phoenix, Oklahoma, Golden State, Clippers in San Antonio. That's Wednesday. And that is your NBA. Now let me lace up the skates to go through what is happening in the NHL. And the same can be said there as far as status quo with everything. Whether it's the Capitals at 71 points, same for the Winnipeg at 71. Not a lot of teams have moved themselves up with big winning streaks or moved up the standings to kind of take a stranglehold. I'm not going to go crazy about the Islanders winning 4 in a row and have the Avalanche coming there tomorrow night after the Avalanche beat the Rangers there at the Garden on a late goal there by Arturi Lehkonen to win 5-4. And I'll start with Colorado there because they were the big story here. More so the Hurricanes because the Hurricanes made a very big trade. They traded away Martin Necas along with the other forward that they had there who actually scored a goal there in the game yesterday against the Rangers in a one Jack Drury. So they traded Necas, who signed a long-term deal, I might add, and Drury to Colorado. And in the process, they added the Blackhawks in the mix to where the Hurricanes brought in Taylor Hall, the former MVP there when he was once with the Devils. But they bring back Mikko Rantanen, a big-time scorer, scored 55 goals a couple of years ago for the Avalanche. And it was a tough sell for the Avalanche, as they stated, because with Rantanen going into a walk year as an unrestricted free agent and certainly a big, giant dice roll for the Hurricanes to make, right, they bring back a stud, but they let go of 2 big players. And yes, they bring back Taylor Hall. Whether or not, what does he have left? I understand he may have plenty of hockey left, but is he going to be anything close to the MVP that he got, off the top of my head, what was it, about 5 years ago as a member of the Devils? To me, I'll say not. But for the Hurricanes to say we got to go all in, we got to get a sniper, we got to get a bona fide scorer, that was not a knock on Necas or even Drury for that matter, but a very risky move unless the Hurricanes are going to sign Rantanen on the dotted line here in the coming days, because why would you make a trade for a guy like that knowing that you've had deep postseason runs the last 2 years, that you're a team that needs to have that superstar type player? Because as I've said before, dating back the last couple of years, the Hurricanes are a system team. They have 4 good lines. They're going to come at you. They're going to be relentless, but they don't have the one guy that you're going to have to key in on if you're an opposing coach. And now they got that guy. But do they sign him long term? That's the $64,000 question. And that's one I can't answer right now. I would think they're going to do whatever it takes. But if Rantanen has a killer second half of this year, and let's say the Hurricanes do have a decent postseason run that maybe they don't get to a cup final, maybe a conference final, and maybe with the blend of his new teammates, does he come back? Who knows? Or maybe he's just going to go to the highest bidder because he wants to get the big payday. Those are interesting questions, and that's why that move by the Hurricanes was a very risky but also shrewd move for that matter, knowing that they're trying to fortify their roster and their team for a long playoff run there in the Eastern Conference. So you have that scenario going on there in the league. Let's see if that's going to pay dividends, especially for Colorado. Now that you get Drury and even Necas there, who's a very good player. So that's what you have with the NHL. Other than that, with the standings, there isn't really anything to discuss, like I mentioned, people. As far as your schedule here for the early part of the week, National Hockey League schedule, as I pull it up here. Tonight, Jersey at Philly. Nah, you don't really have a lot there to discuss. Tomorrow, Winnipeg, Montreal, Carolina at the Garden to play the Rangers. So you're going to see Rantanen up close and personal here if you're a Ranger fan. We're talking about Colorado playing the Islanders. Dallas at Vegas. Good game there tomorrow night. Then you have on Wednesday, Kings in Florida. Home and home with Philly, New Jersey. New Jersey at Philly tonight. And then obviously they're going to go up the Turnpike to play the Devils there on Wednesday. And that is it. Not a lot to sink your teeth into if you're into the National Hockey League here as we approach this final week of January. Anything else I need to bring up here? NHL? No, that is it. And then finally, let me get into the batter's box to talk a little baseball. And the first thing I want to discuss is Pete Alonso. Now, the Mets had their annual event there at Citi Field, the Amazing Day at Citi Field, where they had a lot of the players come in, interact with the fans, you had media, etc. And Steve Cohen, along with Dave Stearns, asking about the negotiations with Pete Alonso, the first baseman who had put up big numbers there for the Mets throughout the 6-year tenure in a Met uniform. And when asked as far as how these negotiations have gone, they said, more so Cohen than Stearns, that it has been exhausting. It has been tiresome. And even to a certain extent, I don't want to quote them, so I'm going to paraphrase here. But they even said that these negotiations are worse than Juan Soto's. Could you imagine? A guy who they negotiated a $765 million contract, that could be actually worse than Pete Alonso is going to get 1/6 of that at best. So now it's a scenario where the door's still open. They've even told Alonso's camp, Scott Boras, as we all know, and remind you, Boras is also Juan Soto's agent, but they want a long-term deal, as I discussed. They had a 6-year, $158 million deal that they thumbed their nose on, and I believe that was prior to Alonso signing Boras as his agent. So with Boras in tow and not getting the deal that they wanted, and for the Mets to put off what was rumored at first, 3 years, $90 million, then it was revised to about 3 to 68, or was it 2 to 68 with an opt-out? All these different offers that the camp of Alonso said, we don't want this. So now it boils down to this. The ball's in Pete Alonso's court. I understand he wants to get paid. I understand a shelf life as a Major League Baseball player, it is finite. It is not forever. And I understand he wants to get paid big bucks. But I'm sorry, you want to be a Met? You've claimed you want to be a Met. You claim that you want to be a part of this fabric and a part of this team. Well, now you're going to have to pick up the phone to call David Stearns. And you're going to have to tell your agent, Scott Boras, to get out of the way. Because if you want to stay here, and if you want to come out to say, I'm going to sign 2 years, whatever, $68 million or even 60 for that matter, I want an opt-out after next year. And if you have that monster year next year, which in all likelihood he may have, with Juan Soto hitting in front of him, forget about Boras. Push him aside. Kick him aside. Call him right now, Pete Alonso, to say, I want to sign. What is it going to take? Is it going to take 2 for this much? Am I going to get an opt-out after this year? All right, so this coming year, I'm going to make $30, $31, $32 million. Let's do it. Look what Blake Snell did last year. He signed that 2-year deal with the Giants. 2 years at what, $63 million? That's $31.5 million. He became a free agent, got paid by the Dodgers. 5 years, $182 million. Pete Alonso, you could do the same thing. It's not out of the realm of possibility. And let me tell you, $31 million isn't anything to sneeze at. You'll be fine. You'll be good. Right, who am I to tell Pete Alonso what to do and how much amount of money he should get? It's January 27th. Clock is ticking. Pitchers and catchers report in about 2.5 weeks. Players in 3 weeks. You don't have forever here. And if you want to be a Met, as you've claimed time after time after time, put your money where your mouth is. Shut up and get this deal signed, because right now, I think you need the Mets more than the Mets need you. At least that's what they're showing you. But as a fan, we need you as much as well as anybody else in that lineup. Because he can have that monster year. And I'm not going to compare him to Aaron Judge in the least. That would be an insult to Judge. But he could put up those monster numbers if he bats behind Soto. He could get back to 45, 115, 120, maybe even bat 260. And if you have a year like that, then you could ask for the sun, moon, and stars. Right now you can't. So therefore, take your tail out from between your legs, call David Stearns, and let's make a deal. And then, speaking of which, speaking of deals, so the Braves signed Jurickson Profar, 3 years, $42 million. And Profar, we understand when he was coming out of Curacao, he was a guy that was highly touted, that this was going to be one of the top 5, 10 players in baseball. Certainly hasn't panned out that way. He's bounced around on a million teams. But he's a guy that is a good outfielder, a very good stick. And when you plug him in with that lineup in Atlanta with Austin Riley, with Ronald Acuna Jr., which we don't know when he's going to come back with that knee injury, with Matt Olson, we go on down the line with this team and their offensive players. So I thought that was a very good move to sign Profar, a guy who's a left-handed bat, a guy that's going to provide some pop, provide some stability at the top of the lineup, maybe to go with Acuna once he's healthy and ready to return. So typical Brave signing, one that kind of flies under the radar if you're not paying attention, but when you see him in the uniform and he's in the lineup, you're like, oh wait, they signed Profar? Now listen, I'm not trying to make him out to be the next best thing since sliced bread. Don't get me wrong. But when you have a bunch of stars on your team to begin with, the aforementioned, and to have a guy like Profar in your lineup, he is as complimentary as it gets, and that's why I like the signing. But that's typical Braves. Maybe they waited for the market to come back to him. Maybe they took a step back and said, all right, we had our eye on this player. Let's see what the temperature's like. Oh, nobody's biting. Let's throw a little line out there, and sure enough, zzz, they reeled him in, and now he's going to be a Brave for the next 3 years. Genius, if you ask me, despite the fact I'm making out Profar to be Willie Mays. But like I mentioned, very good player and very complimentary, a good fit to that Brave puzzle as they're trying to build back toward another championship that they, of course, won just 4 years ago. And that will do it, my good people. Another episode just about in the books, as always. Thank you so much for passing by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, people, please subscribe, rate, review. Throw me a few stars. Write a review on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, the YouTube channel at JAYREELZ, which is right now, slowly but surely, that little engine is climbing up the ranks. And I hope that you've subscribed. And if you haven't, please do so. It would be just, in my heart and soul, super grateful, thankful if you do that. Share the word with the friends, family, foes, frenemies that are into sports, or even likes content, because I'm creating lifestyle content along the way. Got some couple of things cooking, and as well, keep this in mind, people, an announcement is going to be forthcoming on a big event that I have planned. So keep in mind, I'll make an announcement here probably toward the end of the week into the weekend, and then we'll let you know when it'll be revealed as to what this event is going to be like, what it's going to entail. And like I said, it is going to be not just big. I promise you, it is going to be epic. So stay tuned on all of the socials, whether it's YouTube, at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, Twitter, JAYREELZ1, just a number. I may change that to the JAYREELZ Podcast, so just keep in mind on that. I'll let you know and inform you on that in the podcast to come. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is my love, people. In the blood, in the DNA, as I like to say, talking sports. Doesn't matter what time of day, doesn't matter what time of the night, middle of the night, wake me up. Independent, podcaster, content creator, full-time, trying to carve out and blaze a path, trail in this space. Earning a living, which I know the checks haven't come yet, and they will. And the only reason why I bring that up is because that's where I need for you guys and gals to participate. Throw me a few stars, write a review, go on YouTube to subscribe there, spread the word, take screenshots, etc. Because as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and this camera, I will do everything in my power to entertain, to inform, and to deliver nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South End, to the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ podcast, on the foot, baby.